Rosemary. I've been on Witch Talk long enough to remember when it was said that rosemary could be used for anything, like as a replacement for any other herb. While I don't agree with that, it is certainly very useful. In fact, according to British folklore, it could be used to exorcise witches and malevolent ghosts from a house. Now, the full process actually has a lot of, qualifications to it. The rosemary had to be burnt with rue, blackthorn, and hemlock. Granted, I think hemlock alone can probably clear a room for a lot of reasons. It had to specifically be carried out by a man that was recently blessed by a Christian priest. It didn't really seem to matter if it was Catholic or Protestant. Granted, this is Middle Age folklore, so more than likely primarily referring to Catholic, and that would make sense as they're very superstitious. And this specific form of exorcism could only be done on May Day, so May 1st. Now, of course, it's good to keep in mind that within, medieval literature, the term witch does specifically mean, malevolent magic practitioner. There were good ones, and they were usually called tellers. Oh yeah, very interesting folklore. Thank you for watching. So within the magical community, this is a huge debate, especially ones that primarily use herbs. That being said, it is heavily suggested in certain circles that anything with DMT in it can kind of be used for this purpose, DMT being a hallucinogenic compound, often found in, hallucinogenic herbs and whatnot. Whether that works for you or you believe it is kind of up to you. That being said, this question can make a really good video, because it kind of goes about to what does clear quartz has that it has this property, and what does, any herb in question would have to have similar properties for it to be used like this. Clear quartz has this property because as far as, metaphysical properties go, it is an amplifier. Many people believe it has this ability because of effectively two things that are very connected, and that is because it can hold an electric charge, and it has something called I believe it's the piezoelectric effect. Basically, it can more or less convert electric energy into magnetic energy. So it's believed that effectively you can use it for any crystal because it amplifies basically your energy that you're putting into it for the use, as opposed to its other use of just amplifying what's already there. So an herb that can fill this function would have to be able to hold on to whatever energy is going into it. And because a lot of herb work is going to be primarily mental, it makes sense for the DMT theory. Of course, be safe whenever using hallucinogenic substances, even if you're only burning them. But yeah, the magic logic is there for it to be a possibility. Did you know that historically, there were 5 individual trees that were considered the most sacred trees of Ireland? Now, admittedly, depending on which tourist site you're using, some of these trees still exist, but for the sake of the video, I'm gonna say that these are historical trees that no longer exist. But you can still find the churches that were built by these trees, as it was not uncommon in Ireland to build churches by druid groves. These trees are the Bile Torton, which is near Tara in County Westmeath. Excuse my pronunciation on these. The Craib Usne, also in County Westmeath. Eomugna at Moon in County Kildare, and Eorosa in County Carlow. You can find the names for these trees in the Metrical Dainsenchus, again, excuse my pronunciation, which is a collection of poems that is specifically about the folklore of how places got their name. Tree of Rossa, Tree of Mugna, I was the branch of Dathy laid low. Its gentle shoots bore many blows, an ash tree of the skilful host. Its wind-lashed top bore no lasting growth. An ash in Torton recounted well, an ash in Ushnich, where the troops dwell. The branch fell, the truth is plain, in the time of the sons of the Aid slain. Oak of Mugna, bountiful treasure, 900 bushels in great measure. In Derby southwards it did fall, Alby's plain of the cruel war. Yew of Rasa, yew of the graves, plentiful its wooden staves, tree without any hollow or flaw, O noble yew, how was it laid low? The Torchen, Daedry, and Usne are all ash trees, meanwhile Mugna and Rasa are oak and yew. Now, the fact that these individual trees get a lot of reverence is fascinating, and that can probably end up being its own long-form video. But it's always interesting just out of the fact that whenever we reverence trees, in particularly Irish paganism, I often see it get put into the context of entire forest groves, grouping of trees, without necessarily the reverence towards individual trees outside of certain, important aspects that's still how important it is to the rest of the trees, such as the red tree, which is the oldest tree in an orchard and is said to be the embodiment of the local red man of that orchard for trees that bear apples. Thank you for watching, and remember to be vigilant. Cherry trees. Now, under ancient Irish law, the cherry tree was considered a commoner of the wood, however, had quite a bit of folklore significance. And one of those usages is divination, heavily associated with the cuckoo birds that would often eat cherries. Now, upon hearing the bird, you're supposed to gather around the tree and effectively ask it questions. Now, among the most common was, "Cuckoo, cuckoo, cherry tree, good bird, tell me how many years before I die." But other questions seem to be able to be asked as long as you started off with "Cuckoo, cuckoo, cherry tree, good bird." And how long do I have to get married is also seems to be a common question. And as you're asking the question, you shake the tree, and how many cherries fall is an indication of, well, how many years until the desired question. 1 would be this year, 2 is next year, 3 is sometime, and 4 is never. And it's also interesting to note that in many myths and legends associated with the cherry tree is innately tied to the cuckoo bird, and the cuckoo bird itself is said to never sing its first song until it's had 3 cherries from the same tree. Just a little bit of Irish folklore for you. Thank you for watching, and remember to be vigilant. Did you know that in Ireland having your butter enchanted was actually something of a huge problem? It actually makes a decent amount of sense. If you want to enchant someone, you should probably do it by enchanting something you know they're going to eat, and in the, medieval and such eras, that's going to be the butter they make. Now, granted, nowadays we think of enchantments as usually a good thing, but we have to remember enchantment in a magical context doesn't really have that connotation. A lot of enchantments are basically now what we call hexes. But there was a relatively simple defense against this using one of Ireland's own native plants, often called hag's taper, but nowadays you might know it better as mullein. And basically you would disenchant butter by placing mullein under the churn. Mullein in general has a lot of associations with disenchanting. Even just carrying around mullein is said to have effects that will ward off enchantments and somewhat witchcraft in general, but of course results vary. It's called hag's taper partially because it was basically believed that witches used mullein as wicks for their candles, especially for protective magics. It's somewhat debated that we might have got this practice, we as in like Irish and Irish descended people, got this practice from the Romans because using mullein to, disenchant is in the story of Ulysses. He specifically uses it to ward off the enchantments of Circe. And mullein is also just, a good plant to keep around. It's really good for coughs, bronchitis. In fact, it was used directly as medicine. It's also an old recorded cure for asthma and bronchitis that would involve smoking the leaves of mullein like it was tobacco. I personally wouldn't recommend this. I believe we have much better cures for that nowadays, but it's an interesting fact. And in Meath and Westmeath, it was used to cure bee stings. And on a personal note, I've had some experiences where I believe that carrying around Mullein is definitely good at making sure that you can see through certain kinds of glamours. Thank you for watching, and remember to be vigilant. Sleep, no more your dreams shall keep. By Queen of Meadow rise from deep. With petals bright and stems of gold, awake from slumber, break the hold. Breathe the scent, let shadows part, return to life with beating heart. Today we're talking about a plant called Queen of Meadows, also called Meadowsweet. Scientific name is Filipendula ulmaria. Though, strangely enough, Meadowsweet's name actually has nothing to do with meadows. It's actually from an old Anglo-Saxon term for mead sweetener. And it's a flower heavily associated with both ends of the Sleeping Beauty spectrum, both being able to cause really deep or even fatal levels of sleep, or waking people up from such sleep. Specifically, it was not an uncommon practice in Ireland if someone was believed to be in a fairy sleep to put meadowsweet under their bed and they would awake in the morning. Now, it's believed to be associated with both sides of the whole Sleeping Beauty motif because its flowers have a really sweet smell. However, its leaves have a much more bitter smell. Now, in the Mabinogi, when creating a wife for Lou Skillforehand, Meadowsweet was also one of the ingredients in basically creating this person. So there's a possibility that it could even awaken something to life. Meadowsweet within Irish mythology seems to have a lot of significance, specifically the figure Anya, who was the goddess of the land of Munster and the queen of Limerick fairies, was said to have given meadowsweet its smell. And one of the other names for meadowsweet is Cuchullin's belt, and this is interesting because no one knows why. There seems to be a lost myth or a bit of folklore to that name. It's also just generally used in a lot of medicinal qualities. Basically, its roots were made into a powder to fight against dysentery. Its flowers were made into infusions to cure fevers, and many parts of the plant were used to cure colds, sore throats, and other pains. Partially because it contains an element called salicylate, which is something that the human body responds to in a similar fashion as to aspirin. There was even a recipe found in Westmeath where meadowsweet was used as a ingredient in a tonic for nerves. So incredibly helpful in both magical and medical usages. Lady's Mantle is a very interesting plant. Effectively, I was researching plants that I might be able to easily get for a ritual that I'm doing later this week, and I randomly came across Lady's Mantle, the flowering plants of the Alchemilla classification. As is the case with many plants, in Ireland and Scotland, they were used to cure bewitchment, and specifically seem to have associations with curing the evil eye, which has slightly different connotations in Ireland. Specifically, in County Antrim, a cow was cured of bewitchment using the juice of Lady's Mantle, which would include the dew that often gets stuck in the flower, along with the juices from other plants, as they were put into a bucket of water that was used in a meeting of 3 different church parishes, a silver coin, a copper coin, and a Stone Age arrowhead referred to as a fairy flint. Now, the Latin name, as I mentioned earlier, for Lady's Mantle is Alchemilla. This is partially because in alchemy, Lady's Mantle was considered the secret of alchemy in some fashion. Specifically, alchemists would collect Lady's Mantle at dawn, believing that it was the secret to turn other metals into gold. It, of course, has a lot more mundane usages, it often being used to dry up wounds because the plant can reduce inflammation. Women would often either drink or bathe in water somehow affected by Lady's Mantle to help them conceive. And I have to find a way to get in a TikTok appropriate way for the last one. Apparently, when a woman's twin peaks would start to sag, Lady's Mantle could apparently restore such peaks to their former glory. Lady's Mantle actually has a lot of supposed benefits to beauty in general, both, water that's affected by it as well as just the dew that gets stuck there could restore beauty after it had faded. So, more than likely, there is some quality of it makes your skin better. Which shouldn't be surprised because Lady's Mantle is in the same family as roses. I don't know what I'm going to do with this information, but now you all have it. Thank you for watching. So, Maeve is a very popular goddess within Irish paganism, gets a lot of talk on TikTok, but did you know that she is associated with ash trees? Now, for one, Maeve is often seen with a whip in various legends, myths, etc., and whips, generally in Ireland, were made of ash. But there is also a legend that if she ever basically put it in the ground, handled down, it planted a seed, and at every place that, the whip planted a seed is called Maeve, which roughly translates to Sacred Tree of Maeve. Maeve has also been used to describe just about any tree that happens to be near a sacred well, but this still kind of implies the ash tree. And because Maeve is a sovereignty goddess, there's a lot of associations with ashes with kingship, which I always think is very interesting, especially considering I don't want to necessarily say Norse parallels with ash trees, but at the same time, there are correlations. And this correlation also goes into other uh, Celtic areas, including the Gaulish deity Anornia, who was often worshipped in ash groves, who, while mostly a fertility goddess, still seems to have at least some connections with the ruling class. And as I've talked about before, there are even specific ash trees that are, multiple ash trees are a part of the sacred trees of Ireland. But what's also very interesting to me is the very feminine associations with ash. Like, the female goddesses of fertility and sovereignty and protection and all of these things do seem to have very specific feminine flavor. And in one story that involves the felling of an ash tree that I'll tell later, it is the Morrigan who does the blessing of because this tree fell and other things happened, there is peace where this tree fell. Again, this video is probably long enough, so that'll be tomorrow. It's just a lot of neat things to consider. Thank you all for watching.